The morning air in Washington, D.C. held a quiet sharpness, cool, clear, and indifferent. Sunlight spilled down between marble columns and shimmered faintly on the windows of government buildings. It was a day of structure, of silence, and of schedule. Major General Naomi Sinclair stepped out of her government-issued black SUV, the door clicking shut behind her with precision. She adjusted the collar of her deep navy uniform, its gold trim catching the early light. On her chest, a cluster of medals told a story most people would never hear. Decades of service, sacrifice across 3 continents, diplomatic briefings behind closed doors, and commands given in places where decisions meant lives. To the uninformed eye, she might have been mistaken for something ceremonial, too elegant, too composed to be real. But Naomi Sinclair was no figurehead. She was muscle, mind, and history stitched into one body. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk just off Pennsylvania Avenue, checking the time on her analog wristwatch. She had 15 minutes before she was due at a classified briefing with Homeland Affairs. Her driver had been redirected due to an unexpected perimeter shift, so she'd opted to walk the final block. With a thin leather folder tucked under her arm and her ID lanyard visible, she began her measured walk. She passed by a statue of a soldier she once briefed in person, a bronze now frozen in salute. Her heels clicked with quiet authority. But halfway down the block, movement flanked her. 2 local police officers stood near the corner, one leaning against a cruiser, the other sipping from a disposable coffee cup. Their gaze followed her, narrowing as she approached. "Ma'am, excuse me," one said, stepping forward. Naomi stopped, not alarmed, just watchful. "Yes, officer? Mind telling us what you're doing around here in that getup?" She blinked, expression unchanged. "I'm walking to a briefing. I serve under the Department of Defense. Major General Naomi Sinclair." The second officer laughed under his breath, nudging his partner. "The real general wouldn't be out here alone." "Or wearing that wig," the first added, gesturing toward her tightly braided hair. "You cosplaying, ma'am?" Naomi's voice did not rise. "No, I am not. I am in uniform. I am currently in active service, and I would appreciate—" "Do you have real identification?" the second officer cut in. "Military badge? Not this theater prop?" She reached slowly, carefully, into the inside of her blazer and pulled out a secure access badge. It bore her photograph, her name, clearance level, and a Pentagon-verified hologram seal. "Here is my ID. You may verify it through your department's command line." But they weren't looking at the badge. They had already decided what they saw. "You don't look the part," one muttered. Before she could reply, they moved in. One pulled her folder from under her arm, the other seized her wrists and forced them behind her back. The handcuffs clicked into place like punctuation. Not one bystander stepped in. Not yet. The city had learned to look away too quickly, too often. Naomi didn't shout. Her hands, now bound, stayed still. Her breath was steady. She turned her head slightly and looked at the crowd that had started to form. Phones were coming out, recording, uncertain. Then she spoke, not to the officers, not to the crowd, but into the morning itself. "This will be a very short mistake, with a very long consequence." And then she smiled, calmly, confidently, as if she already knew how this would end, because she did. The squad car door slammed shut with a mechanical finality, sealing Naomi Sinclair inside a world far too familiar to those who had worn the uniform and still been judged by the skin beneath it. She sat upright in the back seat, her wrists bound behind her, her service cap now resting beside her on the seat, displaced in the scuffle but never disgraced. Outside, the officers were speaking into radios, low-voiced and annoyed. One paced, the other scrolled through his mobile device, as if checking her ID against something, anything that might justify what they'd just done. Naomi didn't fidget, she didn't beg. She breathed. In, then out. Measured, deliberate, grounded. She had been in war zones. She had brokered ceasefires with warlords. She had stood in rooms where a single sentence could change foreign policy. But this was something altogether different. Something older, quieter, and deeper. A different kind of battlefield. One paved not with landmines, but with assumptions. She leaned forward slightly, her shoulders shifting to give her limited access to the inner pocket of her uniform blazer. It wasn't easy. Her wrists strained against the steel cuffs, but she was practiced. Decades of discipline and posture and motion made her precise. Her fingers brushed metal. The small, dark device clicked as she pulled it forward into view. A secured satellite phone, Department of Defense issued, encoded, traceless, reserved only for high-priority operations, diplomatic emergencies, classified mission failures, or, as it turned out, incidents like this. She dialed one number. No password needed. It connected within seconds. General Harper, a low voice answered, clipped and clear. Naomi's voice came steady, clipped with military rhythm. Sir, this is Sinclair. I've been detained by Metro PD, currently in the back of Unit 43. Officers Collins and Reed. No provocation, in uniform. Video present. Witnesses present. Location, corner of New Jersey Ave and D Street. 10 minutes from the briefing site. There was a pause on the line, not hesitation, but impact. Copy. Stay calm. This will be corrected immediately. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. The call ended. She set the phone beside her, folded her hands again, and turned her gaze toward the rear window. Outside, sirens in the distance shifted direction. Birds overhead scattered. The officers were still speaking to dispatch when their radios crackled. Louder this time, with a distinct change in tone. Units 43 and 45, stand by for immediate supervisor contact. Hold your position. Do not relocate. You are to release the detained subject. Repeat, release immediately and await commanding officer. The street, so casual just minutes earlier, suddenly seemed colder. Officer Collins's face paled slightly. Reed froze. She said she was DOD, Reed mumbled. Collins spat the words like gravel. She said a lot of things. But the tone in the dispatcher's voice wasn't routine. It was clipped, federal, and it waited. 2 minutes later, a black unmarked SUV pulled up. A man in a crisp gray uniform stepped out. His badge was visible. His walk was fast and purposeful. He didn't speak to the officers first. He walked straight to the squad car. When he opened the door, Naomi stepped out without help. She turned to face him, brushing the dust from her sleeves with grace, not anger. Her face was unreadable. General Sinclair, the man said quietly. On behalf of the department, She raised a hand, not dismissively, but decisively. Don't apologize to salvage what's already broken. Fix what allowed it to happen. The supervisor nodded once. Noted. Behind them, Layla Moore, the woman who had filmed the entire ordeal, stood still, phone trembling in her hand. She hadn't stopped recording. Not once, and somewhere deep in the networked veins of the internet, the video was already moving, traveling across platforms, feeds, inboxes. Before noon, the Pentagon would see it. Before sunset, the nation would know it. And Naomi Sinclair? She would still walk into her briefing room, on time, in uniform, unshaken. Because power doesn't scream. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply calls. And when it does, the world listens. By the time Major General Naomi Sinclair entered the government building that afternoon, the briefing room had already shifted in energy. Security had cleared her without a word. Staffers who might have casually glanced at her uniform hours ago now stood a little straighter. Her name had become more than a credential. It had become a signal. She walked the corridor with the same calm poise she carried in the squad car. But behind every step was the echo of a choice, not to react with rage, but with resolve, not to crumble beneath insult, but to rise through it, wordless and intact. She entered the room. 15 federal officials seated around a long, oval table turned as one. A few stood reflexively. Most simply watched, stunned by her presence, by the fact that she still came. No one said a word about what had happened. They didn't have to. The story had already outpaced them. 30 minutes earlier, a video uploaded to a small local account had surged into national view. The footage, grainy, shaking, unmistakable. Two officers interrogating a decorated general, mocking her credentials, then forcing her into cuffs as civilians murmured in confusion. It was damning, not just because of the racism, not just because of the uniform, but because of the silence that followed, until Naomi had spoken. This will be a very short mistake, with a very long consequence. And now the consequences had arrived. Elsewhere in the city, the fallout began its descent. Officer Reed sat at his desk, refreshing his screen every few seconds. His name had not yet appeared online, but the video was spreading. The words Metro PD handcuffs black general in uniform were trending. He reached for his phone, but it buzzed before he could touch it. It was Internal Affairs, requesting immediate appearance. No room for negotiation. Officer Collins was already in the interview room when Reed arrived. His posture had changed from confident to cornered. His arms were crossed, his eyes low. The room was cold, sterile, and far too quiet. A flat screen on the wall replayed the video frame by frame. Each pause exposed a decision. Each zoom in is a moment of failure. Back at headquarters, the chief of police stood with folded arms, facing a crowded room of press. His statement was brief, scripted, and uncomfortably restrained. The treatment of Major General Naomi Sinclair was in direct violation of protocol, basic human dignity, and the core principles of our department. The officers involved have been placed on immediate administrative leave pending full federal review. We will cooperate with every agency to ensure accountability. He didn't take questions. He didn't wait for applause, because there was none. Inside her quarters that evening, Naomi stood before a small mirror. The medals on her chest caught the lamplight softly, almost reluctantly. She removed them one by one, not out of shame, out of ritual. Each piece told a story, yes, but today they had told the country something else, that even the highest honors don't shield a black woman from doubt. Even gleaming brass can be overlooked when worn on the wrong skin. Her phone buzzed gently on the table. It was a message from General Harper. We'll take it from here, but whatever message you wish to send, the platform is yours. Naomi didn't reply immediately. She sat by the window, gazing out at the night as city lights blurred into a soft haze. Somewhere in homes across the country, people were re-watching the video, pausing, reflecting, arguing, mourning. But she wasn't interested in going viral. She was interested in what came after. Not fury, framework, not revenge, reform. Tomorrow she would begin meetings with the Department of Defense's Equity Office. She would propose legislation for mandatory law enforcement training on military identification, protocol adherence, and racial bias intervention. Not just to protect future generals, but to protect the dignity of anyone who dared to wear their service with pride. Naomi Sinclair didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence had already spoken louder than handcuffs ever could. It began with a knock on a door, a modest home in a quiet suburb, miles away from the chaos of headlines and hearings. Layla Moore stood in her kitchen when it came. The woman who had filmed the arrest, who hadn't planned to change anything, only to bear witness, was now being visited by federal agents from the Office of the Inspector General. They didn't come to question her. They came to thank her. Her footage had become part of a federal report submitted to Congress, to the Pentagon, and every major law enforcement agency in the country. Not only had it exposed a gross abuse of power, but it had revealed a pattern. Dozens of formal complaints ignored and buried against the same two officers over the past 5 years. But it took one recording, one moment, one woman who refused to look away. The irony wasn't lost on Layla. She wasn't an activist. She wasn't political. She simply knew what truth looked like. And she knew what it felt like to be dismissed for looking out of place herself. The officers, Collins and Reed, were now suspended indefinitely. Their records opened, interrogated, laid bare. A deeper review uncovered inconsistencies in traffic stops, civilian reports, racial profiling indicators. The video had been a match. Now the fire had started. Inside a private conference room at the Department of Defense, Naomi Sinclair stood before a small group of military and legal officials. She wore the same uniform from the day of the incident, polished, pressed, and undiminished. Her voice was clear, not out of emotion, but from precision. "I am not here because I was disrespected," she began. "I am here because this system cannot afford to ignore what happened and call it an accident." A pause, the room listened. When a soldier in uniform can be mistaken for a threat because of her skin, that is not a miscommunication. That is a reflection. And it's time we held up a mirror. There was silence. Not empty silence, but reverent, active. Naomi opened a folder and passed around a proposal. It was a draft of a joint task force initiative. Project Signal, standardized identification and general acknowledgement for law enforcement. Its mission? Mandatory federal training for all local law enforcement on recognizing legitimate military credentials, immediate verification protocols to prevent unlawful detainment, bias awareness and de-escalation programs rooted in psychological data and case history. It wasn't radical, it was overdue. One official, a younger man in a civilian suit, cleared his throat. "General, with respect, do you believe one policy will change decades of assumption?" Naomi looked at him, not with challenge, but with the still power of someone who has lived through what others only read about. "No, but it forces a choice, and that's where change begins." Outside, the world moved faster. News outlets flooded with headlines. She didn't yell, she reformed the system. General Sinclair's quiet revolution. Military to metro, you will learn what respect looks like. Across social media, the clip of her statement began to circulate. Not the arrest, not the outrage, but her words, her stillness, her refusal to be reduced. At a military base in Georgia, a group of young black cadets watched in silence, fists tightening unconsciously at her composure. One of them whispered, "She looks like us." Another replied, "And she stood like none of them ever thought we could." That night, Naomi sat in her living room, the lights low, a steaming mug untouched beside her. The television was muted. She didn't need to hear the noise. She had always known what this moment was about. It was never just about her. It was about the black airmen stopped at the gate 3 weeks before. The Navy officer questioned while in uniform. The woman in fatigues was mistaken for a delivery girl. The child who watched it happen and wondered if bravery had a color. Naomi leaned back, shoulders square, the weight of history pressing gently against her, but never pushing her down. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message. "They want you to lead the campaign, nationwide." She didn't reply. Not yet. She needed a moment, not to prepare a speech, not to celebrate a takedown, but to breathe, to remember who she was before the handcuffs, and who she was because she never let them define her. A month had passed, the air in D.C. had cooled, and the city moved with the rhythm of a place that had been quietly, permanently shifted. Inside a secure auditorium at Fort Andrews, a crowd gathered, not for a military parade or a medal ceremony, but for a national unveiling. On stage, standing at the center, was Major General Naomi Sinclair. No music, no spotlight, just her and a podium beside a large display bearing 6 bold words. This is what a general looks like. The room was full: military officers, law enforcement officials, young cadets, and journalists. The campaign, born from a mistake, was now a national initiative backed by the Pentagon and the Department of Justice. Behind her were video screens showcasing soldiers of every background: Black, Asian, Indigenous, Latinx, women, men, non-binary, each one in full uniform. Each one is dignified. Each one deserves, Naomi began slowly. I was handcuffed not because I broke the law, but because I didn't match someone's idea of what power looks like. That's the danger of assumptions. And it's also why we're here. This campaign isn't about image. It's about recognition. We're not asking for respect because of medals. We're demanding it because of our humanity. And starting today, every officer in this country will know what protocol looks like, what bias sounds like, what accountability must feel like. Thunderous applause followed, not because of the performance, but because of the presence. Because Naomi had done what few could: transform silence into policy, pain into protection. Later that day, across police academies and federal offices, a training video was played. Naomi stood in uniform, speaking directly to the camera. You may never remember my name, but remember this: my uniform didn't protect me from racism, but my rank now protects others from your ignorance. Think before you judge. Think before you cuff. Short message. Power doesn't need to shout. True strength is measured by how you use your voice, especially when the world tries to silence it. Would you like a full version of this story compiled into one document or video script format?